Peter Bone. Peter Bone, the former Attorney General, Dominic Greaves, there's this notion that we'll be able to extricate ourselves fully from the European Court of Justice. It's just pie in the sky.
Well, I think he's absolutely wrong. I mean, we've heard what the Prime Minister said. She was absolutely right. And when we come out of the EU, the European Court will have won't be able to determine what happens here. And that's quite clear. And it will be very difficult to read the position paper and come up with any other conclusion than that.
Well, some members of the government seem to concede that extricating ourselves completely will be quite difficult. Justice Minister said this morning, Dominic Raab, we'd have to keep half an eye on the case law of European Court of Justice. Well, if they've got nothing to do with this, why do we have to keep any eye on
But
them?
you didn't quite finish, because it also said they'd have to keep half an eye on what we did. And that, clearly, you will look at the Supreme Courts of each country, and we would take account and listen to what the Americans
But
would
is that extricating yourself completely?
Because the point is, the European Court will no longer be the final arbitrator of what happens. And that's clear. And what was the key issue in the referendum was we make our own laws in our own countries, and it's our own judges that determine it. And that's what we've got today, and we should rejoice at.
Chuka Umunna, this is exactly what the public voted for.
Well, I'm not sure it was. I mean, let's first of all take stock. We're over a year out from that referendum. We're over 5 months after the triggering of Article 50, and only now is the government coming forward with these position papers. And the reason they said they were doing that was to provide more certainty as to what their position is. Well, on this, they've looked at and put forward 7 different scenarios. We don't know which one they envisage pursuing, which, of course, for businesses that your viewers, they rely on the jobs. It doesn't create the certainty that they need. And the second point is this. One of the key promises, and Peter was talking about it there, that the Vote Leave campaign made, was that European judges will have no impact, no influence on the the interpretation of law and rules that govern this country. And it's very clear from the different scenarios that have been suggested that they do envisage the European Court of Justice at least playing some role, account being taken of its jurisprudence. So that is yet another promise that was made to the people that was broken. Now, I'm relaxed about that because I wanted us to stay in the European Union, and I don't share the analysis of Peter on the sovereignty point. But increasingly you are seeing that the Brexit, in the terms that it was sold to the British public, is proving impossible.
But just briefly,
absolutely impossible for the government to deliver.
The Prime Minister and Peter Bone have made it quite clear. They say once we're out of the EU, the European Court will have no jurisdiction over UK laws. Why do you dispute that? What evidence do you have of that?
Well, I'll give you an example. One of the scenarios that is put forward in the paper is for the European Free Trade Association Court to act as an arbiter on the governing of the relationship, in part, between the UK and the European Union after we depart. Now, the EFTA Court generally pays attention to and follows the precedent of the European Court of Justice. So I just give that as one example. But of course, in addition to the sovereignty and the legal point, the other very big issue, I don't agree with Peter on this about the big thing for people. I think the #1 issue that dictated how many people voted is whether they were going to get their £350 million extra per week going into public services. And there's no sign of that happening at all.
Peter Bone, for a second, if you would. Peter Bone, this is a broken promise.
When somebody speaks for so long, it normally means they haven't actually got anything to say, and I think Chuka just proved that point. The truth of the matter is, you've had your go. Chuka, shush for a minute, shush. When you have 2 organisations, one the European Union and one UK, and there's a dispute, you have to have a neutral body to sort it out. And that's what that paper talks about. And you cannot read that paper without coming to that conclusion that the European Court will no longer rule over the United Kingdom. Very
briefly, I mean, is it possible when there will be disputes with the EU that neutral body, if you like, can be outside completely of European law? That's just not possible, is it?
The most obvious one is the World Trade Organization, and it talks in the paper quite a lot about that. Very well-established disputes procedure, and I would think that's the one we'll opt for.
Very briefly, Chuka Umunna, I mean, what is Labour's very specific policy on this? Because on other issues, they've fallen behind the government on this, haven't they?
Well, look, on the European Court of Justice, the Labour Party is very clear that the continued role that European Court of Justice jurisprudence had has on the way law operates here should not be a red line, because what it would do is prevent us continuing to benefit from some of the good things, lots of the good things that we get from the European Union now, like being part of and engaged with the European Nuclear Atomic Agency, which helps cancer treatment in our NHS. That surely is a good thing we want to continue with.
I'm going to have to end it there. Chuka Umunna, Peter Bone, thank you very much for